The first mechanic I'd like to show you is by far the most common effect in all of Final Fantasy XIV, and that is simply an orange or yellow effect on the ground that indicates that you're about to take damage in that location. Now, most of the time it's a circle, sometimes it's a line or a cone, but it always works the same way. Just get out of it or you take damage. It's pretty self-evident. But there are a couple of details that a lot of people don't realize, and it tends to lead to them complaining that there's latency involved, and they did the mechanic right and yet they still took damage. So here is how this mechanic actually works in 99% of cases. The system confirms who takes damage not when the particle effect goes off like in some games, but instead when the effect disappears. In the examples that I'm currently showing you, I stepped out of the effect, and then once the effect vanished but before the particle effects played, I stepped back into the particle effects and I took 0 damage. So if you avoided the effect and you still took damage, you were probably standing in the targeted area when the indicator disappeared. Most bosses in the game have a cleave of some description, and a cleave is just a kernel AoE that comes either without an indicator or without enough time to get out of it. Some bosses cleave on practically every auto attack that they do, some have a cone appear that's just too quick to execute for you to get out of once you see it, and some cast spells that don't have any indicator at all. Either way, you handle this mechanic the same regardless of what type of cleaves the boss has. If you're a tank, you face the boss away from the party and you don't suddenly turn it into the party, and if you're a member of the party, you just don't stand in front of the boss. It's that simple. The pulsing red and purple eye indicates the gaze mechanic and will apply a negative status effect if you're looking towards its origin point when the effect triggers. Your camera is irrelevant to this, it's your character model that has to look away. If the eye comes with an AoE marker like a cone, you can stand in the affected area it indicates but look away to avoid any negative effects. Stack markers are perhaps one of the most self-evident and yet one of the most often failed mechanics in all of Final Fantasy XIV, which is really quite a shame since failing them tends to wipe an entire party. The logic behind them is incredibly simple. You stack together because the damage that it applies is split between all the people beneath it. The most common form of this mechanic is a circular AoE, and all that you have to do to perform this mechanic correctly is simply stand inside the circle. However, there are two variations of this, the first of which is that it applies damage once and then it finishes. The second of which is what people call an arc morn, which is where the AoE applies multiple times in a pulse pattern. So if it's got 3 pulses to apply, it's going to hit, pause, hit, pause, hit, pause. But if everyone gets out after the first pulse, then the second pulse is obviously going to kill whoever the marker is on. But what makes it truly deadly is if it's got 3 pulses and the person with the marker dies on the second pulse, the attack doesn't end early, it just picks a random person and shoots the next pulse at that person. And since they have no stack indicator, nobody stacked with them, they're going to die. So the rule of thumb of this mechanic is just treat it like it's an arc morn, stay in it until the effect is obviously stopped. The second version of this mechanic, which doesn't have an arc morn form, it only ever hits once, is the line stack AoE. This one works exactly like the other form of this mechanic, except for that the damage is spread between everyone in a straight line from the origin point of the effect out in the direction of the indicator. Proximity effects are effects that do more damage the closer you are to their epicenter. The most common form of this mechanic is a small orange circle with a larger circle that radiates outwards from it. The second is known as a flare and is indicated by 3 large white arrows that pulse above the person's head in the shape of a triangle. Flare tends to be targeted at tanks specifically, and it tends to do a lot less damage than the orange circle variant of this, but you handle both of them the same way regardless, you just get away from them physically. Bombs describe any mechanic that falls in a set pattern and then detonates in that pattern. It can appear in many forms such as overlapping circular AoEs in Shiva or Tsukiyomi, or large boulders that explode in Titan. It really amounts to standing where the last bomb fell and waiting for a safe spot to be created by the earlier bombs detonating and then moving into that spot. Towers and meteors are a mechanic that require a player to stand in them. If they don't, they tend to explode on the raid and do even more damage than they would have done to a single target, often leaving debuffs as well. For healers, status effects that can be removed with the Asuna spell are marked with a blue line above the effect, as you can see in this example. You can see the statuses of other players in the party listing next to their name and HP. While we currently have a system for interrupting enemy actions, there's no clear indicator of what actions can and can't be interrupted. However, in Shadowbringers they'll be adding an orange glow around the cast bar of enemy actions that can be interrupted, and tanks and ranged DPS will be getting dedicated interrupt skills. So to interrupt enemy actions, you just have to watch the cast bar and use the interrupt skill when the bar glows orange. And that's all the enemy mechanics that I wanted to show you. There are ones that I haven't shown you, like knockbacks for example, but these are the ones that you either have to know or that catch people off guard more often than not, so these felt like the most important mechanics to show you. However, I would like to show you some mechanics, not of your enemies, but of your friends, because there are certain effects that your party mates can use that people just don't understand what they are because they haven't played with the role, and then they either don't utilize them or they run away from them when they aren't dangerous. So all the effects are perfectly safe to stand in, and for the bubbles that the healers make actively beneficial to stand in either through damage mitigation or HP restoration or both.